Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily News. I'm Nicholas Richardson. Polish President Andrzej Duda gave an interview to CNN television, one of the most important news outlets in the world. The Polish leader commented on the recent decision by the US president to allow Ukraine to use missiles capable of hitting targets within Russia. He also gave assurances that if NATO countries pursue a consistent and coherent policy, including in the area of armaments, we are not in danger of war with Russia. In another interview for the Bloomberg agency, Andrzej Duda criticised German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and his phone conversation about Ukraine's future with Russian dictator Vladimir Putin.
It was a good decision. This is how Polish President Andrzej Duda commented on Joe Biden's approval of Ukraine's use of US missiles against targets on Russian territory. He was asked to comment on the matter by journalists from the US news channel CNN. I accepted President Biden's decision with great joy and relief because I believe that Ukraine needs the lifting of restrictions on the use of military aid from allies. This is a rational decision, and in the current situation, it is very much needed. According to the Polish president, the decision is a clear signal to Russia that Ukraine can count on the support of its Western allies, including the United States. Andrzej Duda added that Poland currently spends 4% of its GDP on armaments, and if other NATO countries did the same, our world would be safe. Also, after President-elect Donald Trump takes office. I am calm about what policy towards Russia he will implement. It will definitely not be a soft policy. There is only one condition. According to President Andrzej Duda, NATO countries must pursue not only a consistent, but also a coherent policy. In another interview for the Bloomberg agency, President Andrzej Duda criticized German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Scholz called Putin a few days ago with a proposal for peace negotiations. I believe it was an attempt to bring about a ceasefire in Ukraine before Donald Trump took office. Bloomberg also writes that the Polish president warned Donald Trump about Germany's behind-the-scenes efforts on behalf of the Kremlin. These interviews are of great importance because they show Poland as a key player in this part of Europe. Poland is a key place where the interests of the big European powers, but also those of the world, meet. Scholz's conversation with Putin was also criticized by Ukraine and some of its allies, among them the head of Estonia's diplomacy. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin was a strategic mistake. However, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk positively commented on the phone conversation between Scholz and Putin. A while ago, I received a phone call from Chancellor Scholz, who gave me an account of his conversation with Vladimir Putin. I was pleased to hear that the Chancellor not only unequivocally condemned Russian aggression, but that he reiterated the Polish position: nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Only after a wave of criticism did Tusk publish another post saying that Putin could not be stopped with mere phone calls. Meanwhile, a month ago, the leaders of the United States, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom discussed the future of Ukraine in Berlin. President Andrzej Duda recalled that there was not enough room at the table for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Scholz was and is a brake on all aid. That is, by his actions, he is trying to convince other countries, especially the United States, of course, but also France, not to give this full-scale military aid after all. This is dangerous because, in this way, Russia's aggressive imperialism will be strengthened once again. A swift end to the 1,000-day war in Ukraine, on terms favorable to Ukraine and the West, is also being announced by US President-elect Donald Trump. He will take office on the 20th of January.
Critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea may have been targeted by Russian attacks. 2 underwater cables connecting Germany to Finland and Sweden to Lithuania were cut almost at the same time. The German defense minister speaks of sabotage and provocation. The Finnish service is investigating, and the Swedish military is alerting allies to hostile actions in the region. Finland is even considering triggering NATO's Article 5. The British and Portuguese navies are also reporting Russian aggression at sea.
There are no coincidences in the Baltic Sea. There are Russian sabotages and provocations to strategic telecommunications cables connecting Sweden to Lithuania and Germany to Finland were damaged one day after the other. The German Defense Ministry has no doubts. This is a clear sign that something is wrong here. No one believes that these cables were cut accidentally. So we have to assume that this was a hybrid attack. We must also assume that it was a sabotage. The telecommunications cable connecting Germany's Rostock to Finland's capital Helsinki, called the Sea Lion, is nearly 1,200 kilometers long and is one of the fastest in the region. It was cut about halfway along its length. This is critical infrastructure that ensures the fast and seemingly secure flow of data between European Union and NATO allies.
Investigation ongoing that we are giving time to authorities with several countries to investigate it thoroughly. But it's clear that we have to have more protection to critical infra.
If it is confirmed that Russia or another country carried out the sabotage action, then the Finnish foreign minister won't even rule out triggering NATO's Article 5, claiming that an attack on their country's critical infrastructure is an attack on all alliance countries. The Swedish military and Lithuanian services have also joined the investigation. The answer to the question of who cares about hostile action in the Baltic Sea comes to mind. Evidently, this would be an action of Russia, because these are the connections between, let's call it, the core of the Western world and the border states with Russia, or in the case of Lithuania, with Belarus. Here, no other country would have interests in this type of action. This is some more organized action, in my opinion, a broader operation. Finnish media write that a cargo ship from China, which had previously docked in a Russian port, sailed near the cut cables. It is now being followed by 2 Danish warships. After Sweden and Finland joined NATO, Russia lost influence in the Baltic Sea, which almost became an internal body of water for the alliance, and the Swedish and Finnish armies gained powerful allies. Russia is only left to provoke other countries. There are more and more provocations in the region, and they are becoming more serious. Cables are used to transmit information that is crucial not only for security, but also for the economy. The global banking system is connected in this way, so this is already a very, very serious threat, and Russia is showing that it is already a rogue state. Just a few days ago, the Russian spy ship Yantar sailed dangerously close to critical infrastructure around the British Isle of Man in the Irish Sea. It was escorted away by the British fleet. The Portuguese are also complaining about the Russians, who have noticed increased traffic of Russian vessels in the Portuguese maritime areas. Therefore, in the Baltic Sea, full mobilization.
Planning, together with the US Navy, planning larger air operations with air-to-air refueling and a lot of air-to-air operations together with the Super Hornets over the Baltic Sea.
Technicians have been sent to the area of the damaged cables to assess the damage. It is known that repairs could take up to 2 weeks.
The 19th of November marks 1,000 days since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Since the 24th of February 2022, the Russians have been conducting regular rocket fire on Ukrainian territory. Often their targets are civilians. Women, elderly people and children are killed. So far, all attempts to start peace negotiations, or at least to aim for a ceasefire, have failed.
Russia invaded Ukraine from 3 sides, the largest attack on a European country since World War II. The pretext for the invasion was to protect the populations of the so-called Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics, which only Russia recognized. In reality, it was a continuation of Russian imperial policy with a passive, sleepwalking West. I have decided to carry out a special military operation. It is aimed at protecting the population that has been persecuted for 8 years by the Kiev regime. After the initial territorial gains, the Ukrainian people, with great effort, managed to repel the enemy and, above all, close the way to Kiev. We are already distributing weapons and will distribute them in the defense of our country to anyone who is willing and able to defend our sovereignty. The future of Ukraine depends on each citizen. The entire free world condemned the Russian aggression against the independent state. The wider West led by the United States, has introduced sanctions against the Russian regime and multi-level aid to Ukraine, both military and humanitarian.
The Russian military has begun a brutal assault on the people of Ukraine. Without provocation, without justification, without necessity, this is a premeditated attack.
Poland and the Polish people have always been at the forefront of this assistance. Millions of our eastern neighbors fleeing the war found refuge in our country. 3 weeks after Russia launched its barbaric invasion, Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki and Deputy Prime Minister Jarosław Kaczyński were among the first to arrive in Kyiv in March of 2022. Our Ukrainian neighbors, our friends, now need not only moral support, but also very concrete support. Ukraine today stands for fundamental European values. First of all, we all want to help Ukraine, and we know how important its struggle is, because it is a struggle for all of us. It is a struggle for civilization. The symbols of Russian barbarism will forever be Bucha and Irpin. In the liberated areas, in addition to mass graves, bound bodies were found with traces of execution. These are war crimes and will be recognized by the world as a genocide. People were killed, tortured, their limbs were cut off, women were raped, and children were murdered. What is this, if not genocide? The heroic defense of Mariupol will go down in the history of armed conflicts. Russian forces bombarded the port city with all available means for almost 2 months, turning Mariupol into a pile of rubble. As a result of an aerial bomb that hit the theater building there, about 300 people who had taken refuge there were killed. Together with hundreds of soldiers of the Azov regiment in the Russian siege, without food, water, and in terrible sanitary conditions, almost 2,000 civilians survived. In addition to relentless attacks on the more than 1,000-kilometer-long front, the Russians are launching missiles from launchers, aircrafts, and ships, as well as thousands of combat drones on Ukrainian cities and towns. We are used to drone attacks because they fly every night, but when there are rocket attacks, we seek shelter. During the invasion, the Russians abducted nearly 20,000 Ukrainian children. The International Criminal Court has declared this a war crime and grounds for persecution. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for President Vladimir Putin and Maria Lviv-Belova for war crimes related to the illegal deportation of children from the occupied territories of Ukraine into Russia. As in 2022 and 2023, also this year, the Russians intensify attacks on energy and heating infrastructure in late fall. Tonight, more than 100 combat drones flew towards Ukraine. Most of them were shot down, but this time, in addition to infrastructure facilities, civilians were also affected. Just today, 1,000 days after the invasion began, Ukraine attacked Russian territory with ATACMS missiles for the first time. The attack on an arms depot near Bryansk was made possible by the approval of outgoing US President Joe Biden, which President Zelensky has sought at every opportunity since the invasion began. We are planning real actions to stabilize the front line, the necessary operations of the armed forces in the temporarily occupied territories, as well as in Russia, targeting military infrastructure. Next year, Ukraine will produce at least 30,000 long-range drones and at least 3,000 cruise missiles. A number of scenarios for ending the devastating war, in which thousands of civilians have been killed in addition to hundreds of thousands of soldiers, have recently been floated in the international space. According to Polish President Andrzej Duda, Russia, which started the war, cannot emerge victorious. This Russian imperialism is greedy and unstoppable in the sense that if it is not, as I said, decisively defeated and quashed, it will want to seize more and more territory. Much will depend on the new US President, Donald Trump, who has promised to end the war as soon as he takes office. Whenever that happens, President Zelensky, in a speech 100 days after the Russian invasion, once again assured that Ukraine would never give up claims to its territories.
Polish farmers are voicing their opposition to the government's actions and have announced protests. For the time being, they have held a press conference in front of the Sejm, but are on strike alert. They may soon follow in the footsteps of protesting farmers in France. Why? They're expressing their opposition to the agreement between the European Union and South American countries. Farmers' unions are complaining about the lack of an official position of the Polish government against the import of South American meat and sugar. Will Polish farmers take to the streets again?
The Polish government has not been keeping an open dialogue with the country's farmers. They have not consulted them on the proposed Mercosur agreement with South American countries, nor on newly announced animal welfare regulations, which are due to go before Parliament for the first time this week. Will farmers take to the streets again? France is against it. All countries are against it. We as Poles are against it too, because we know that if these products come from South America, it will cripple our farms. There is no reaction at all from the Polish government, especially from the Prime Minister. Farmers across Europe are speaking with one voice. They are unequivocally opposed to the agreement with the South American countries because they do not want the European market to be flooded with beef, poultry and sugar from South American countries that do not meet EU standards. In France, farmers are already taking to the streets, despite assurances that President Emmanuel Macron opposes the deal. We cannot understand how we in France can continue to accept that our children, our fellow citizens, eat imported products that we in France do not have the means or the right to produce. It's not right, so we have to say stop. It's over, we can't take it anymore. Our patience is running out. For now, Polish farmers merely communicate their refusal. They may soon follow in the footsteps of the French. The agreement with Mercosur will hit European farmers very hard, including Polish farmers, because they are large countries that do not comply with EU regulations that we have had to meet since joining the European Union, such as animal welfare. We had to increase the area for cattle, the area in cages for poultry. These countries just don't have to bother, so they can raise more of these animals per square metre. Law and Justice MPs expressed their opposition to the EU-Mercosur agreement in a draft resolution submitted to Parliament in which they stress that food security is one of the pillars of Polish national security. The threat of opening up South American agriculture is back. There's also the question of Ukrainian agriculture. After the war, we will have to establish relations with Ukraine on a basis other than free trade. Otherwise, our agriculture will collapse under such an influx of products grown without EU regulations, and we cannot allow that to happen. What does the government say? For now, only the Minister of Agriculture has spoken. That it is against signing the agreement with Mercosur. It warns that the adoption of the agreement in its current form would significantly affect the European market.
Pan premier Kosiniak-Kamysz mówi, jesteśmy przeciwko umowie z Mercosurem. No to
Mr. Deputy Prime Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz says, we are against the Mercosur agreement. Why then hasn't the government taken an official stance on the agreement? So far, only the Ministry of Agriculture has spoken out. We, Law and Justice, have submitted a draft resolution to oppose Mercosur. Show that you are against this agreement and pass this resolution. I have given it a print number and it has been referred to the Committee on Agriculture, which I understand will consider it. If the government does not make its position clear, there is a serious risk that Polish farmers will take to the streets again. We are constantly on strike alert. Solidarity has already announced this protest. At the moment, all the unions, even those very sympathetic to this government, have themselves realised over the course of the last year that this government does not meet the expectations of Polish farmers. This is one of the most numerous social groups and one of the most dissatisfied with the actions of the government.
That's the news. Thank you for watching, and from me, have a good night and a better tomorrow.